Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Chicanery. I am your host, Danny, and we have JT
Hello again.
and two special guests. A bit of a crossover episode today, and for brilliant reason, I promise. But we have two of the boys from the main side, Arthur and Jarrett. Say hello.
See, I wanna be ratchet, but this isn't my show, so I'll just say hello. Good evening.
I I was gonna compliment you. It's nice in here. There's nice carpet. The music's nicer. The water tastes better. The air is cleaner.
Got
It's a good
Voss's we
time.
got Voss bottles in here, y'all. This bougie. We living good over
Get
here.
used to this.
Yes, so they are, yes, they're just observers. They're guests in the house for this episode. But we felt it wonderful to do, I guess you can call this sort of I don't know if anybody remembers just that fever dream of an album when Linkin Park and Jay-Z got together, the Collision Course album. This is basically just that, but for the show.
That's so
Um,
perfect. I love that so
I
much.
love that album actually, so I appreciate you recommending
Yes.
that.
I unironically do too. I was listening to it just the other day. That was why it popped in my head. But this is a recap of the 2024 British Grand Prix. And for those of you in the background that are screaming, "Oh, but where's Spain and Austria?" Chronologically is a bit hinky. Those are coming later. Usually, this isn't a super interesting stretch of races, so I had kind of committed to the idea of a triple header. And then you had two of those 3 weekends really pop off. So, oops. um, but without further ado, guess gonna jump into all the off the track stuff.
What's going on, everybody? It's your apparently least favorite podcast host. Yeah, I'm a little salty about that poll. Come here to talk to you guys about something real quick. Now, I know I wasn't on this episode, and I know I haven't been on any recent episodes, but I can't help it. I've been crisscrossing the nation, exploring every barbecue joint and subsequently bathroom, from Houston all the way to Miami. But, be that as it may, we still have work to do outside of our regular jobs, right? So we're less than a month out from going back to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the oval configuration. So excited about it. What else? What does that have in common with anything else? What are you talking about, Carl? Why are you mentioning this race? Well, that's because our great friends at Home Field Apparel are, of course, based out of Indianapolis. And if you haven't heard me talk about them before, you're in for a treat. Home Field Apparel is a vintage collegiate apparel company. They've done designs for over 80 collegiate programs. They also this year got into making vintage motorsports apparel. They've had some awesome collections: the Hendrick Motorsports, the Indy 500 collection, the Aero McLaren collection. All fantastic shirts, fantastic products. It is blistering hot in at least 50% of the country right now, probably more. And I'm telling you something, there is nothing better to cool you off on a hot day like a quality made home field shirt. Those other places, those shirts are heavy wool. They're made for guys in Siberia. You're gonna burn, roast alive one of those things. You get you a nice, cool, crisp home field shirt. Don't shrink in the wash. Don't hold me to that. I don't want us to get sued, but they usually don't shrink in the wash. Great quality at a great price on top of that. And they're easy to get to. Homefieldapparel.com. They've even got an app. It works wonderful. And then while you're at it, use our code VLV24 for 15% off your first order. Like I said, go and check out the merchandise. They've got some great collections, some great hats. I mean, just everything about them. Mwah, wonderful. Anyway, again, that's code VLV24 at homefieldapparel.com.
2024 silly season is proving to be the silliest of seasons. Pretty much, if you can think of it, chances are it has been floated this year, and that has truly been no exception since we last gathered for an episode of Chicanery. The biggest thing starting with Mercedes cooling on Andreas Kimi Antonelli for 2025. Now, the whole idea is that, he was promoted straight to F2 from F4. He's the greatest thing ever. Toto Wolff won't shut up. But now they have backpedaled on that quite significantly. And from what I understand, there are a number of confluences for this. First of all, being that, well, funny enough, what happens when you promote a 16-year-old, 17-year-old from F4 to F2 is going to be a little rough. There have been some questions over race execution and just general race pace, although it's worth noting that he's with Prema, and unfortunately, Prema is going through some of the teething issues in F2 that with this new regulations era that Mercedes did a few years ago, funny enough. And so their race pace has not been what it was for what was widely considered sort of the preeminent superpower in F2. But additionally, with Mercedes really picking up in form here, there's some thoughts that maybe they could be title contenders in 2025, and throwing a young rookie into what would basically be off the bat a bit of a pressure cooker situation may not be the wisest thing to do. Um, but the fact that we have potentially a newfound seat vacancy is posing some bigger issues a little bit further down the driver market. Um, and that being one, Mr. Carlos Sainz Jr. The will he, won't he, where will he go of the driver market, that's been the other big story of obviously outside of Lewis's blockbuster move to Ferrari. Um, first it was looking like he was within a hair of signing for Williams. Then there was some thought that he may end up going to Sauber. Of course, Sauber is becoming Audi, and Carlos Sainz Sr. has a very long professional relationship with the Four Rings. But then there's some talk that, well, maybe it'll actually be Haas, and so on and so forth. It's all extraordinarily messy. And that is proving to be a real obstacle. James Vowles, team principal of Williams, has said that he would love Sainz, but is not going to wait forever. And that seems to be the general sentiment amongst the paddock, is that lots of teams would love to have Carlos, but they're not going to wait forever for him to make a decision. Carlos, however, seems to be hell-bent on kind of doing the opposite, and playing the market. But as underrated as I think Carlos is, I genuinely think, and JT and I have talked about this ad nauseum, I think he is the better of the two, I guess, current Ferrari drivers. Yeah, he doesn't quite have the out and out, particularly qualifying pace of Leclerc, but just race IQ and general racecraft, I think, clears Leclerc by a country mile. But he's not a Charles Leclerc. He's not a Max Verstappen. He's not a Lewis Hamilton. He doesn't have the curb appeal to sit here and play the driver market like this. And I could see this ending in him being left without a seat. But curious rumor that's propping up is that, well, it's not really propped up. It has re-intensified amongst their poor run of form. Is that Verstappen leaving for Mercedes? Now, it's worth noting that is very much Jos and Christian continue to be at each other's throats post the breaking of Christian's potential improprieties, to phrase that tactfully. And Jos really wants Verstappen to leave. Verstappen doesn't seem quite so keen on that idea. It's worth noting. However, the uptick in form could potentially create an avenue of interest, but we'll see. But moving into the absolutely just balmy parts of the news cycle, Alpine downgrading to a customer team. So it's worth noting Alpine, nay Renault, nay about 1,000 other different things at this point, has been a full works team for a while. It's Team Enstone. But I'm sure if you've paid any attention to F1, then you're acutely aware of the fact that Renault Alpine has been having kind of a rough go of it really the last couple years. And then there's an argument to be made that they've really been underperforming since the resumption of full works takeover. And I guess it would have been 2016, I do believe. But that may well be coming to a head. The rumor mill has it that Alpine would downgrade itself to a customer team and take Mercedes engines. It's worth noting that for the upcoming rule set, Aston Martin is moving to Honda powertrains, which would effectively leave a vacancy in Mercedes' customer program, thus giving them the capacity in which to do so. But the funny thing is, going back to Carlos Sainz, is that this has renewed some interest in him from potentially signing with Alpine, um, which is curious. I personally think that if he's going to go the route of signing with a Mercedes customer team, he's just better off doing that with Williams. Say what you will about Williams and their sort of their run of form to start the season, but that seems like a more solid move than going to Alpine, with which is still incredibly French and frankly extraordinarily poorly managed. Um, that seems like a recipe for Carlos to get himself into something that he's not really prepared for, frankly. And to kind of compound that, Flavio Briatore has re-entered the scene for reasons unclear to anybody except Luca De Meo. So a little bit of a history lesson because I rather enjoy those. Um, Flavio Briatore has been in and around the current or the Formula One grid since the 90s. He was instrumental in Benetton's rise to championship frontrunners in 1994 and 1995. He was a big driving force between Renault becoming a full works team the first time, and I guess that would have been 2001, 2002, thereabouts. And he was also an instrumental figure in the Singapore Grand Prix Crashgate in 2009 with what was ING Renault at that time. Him and Pat Simmons, they instrumented that whole thing, and both were pushed out in disgrace. With Briatore being given a effectively lifetime ban from the sport, but through the International Court of Appeals, that was overturned, and it just became, I don't know, it was like 5 years or something. But it's just, it's wild to think that Flavio is basically back at the team that he was, again, disgraced from, 15 years ago. I Nobody really knows quite what executive advisor is because that's his official capacity, or quite what that means. There's some rumor mill that it could be prepping the team for sale because that's been one of the other pervasive rumors with Alpine is that they may just say bugger it and sell the whole team. But we'll truly just have to wait and see. But my eyes bugged out of my head because that was right before the Austria weekend that was announced when I saw that flippin' Flavio was back, of all people. Um, but less of a surprise is that Red Bull might end up dropping Sergio Perez after all. Of course, he had his contract renewed just before Q1 at Canada. So this is 4 races ago, 5 weeks ago now. But he's had a horrible run of form really for the last like 4 or 5 races, and then was promptly rewarded with a contract extension. Um, he has had multiple Q1 exit. That kid's, by the way, is foreshadowing. And several finishes where he has been either just scraping up a point or two, or just pointless finishes altogether. And of course, a couple years ago when Red Bull was all conquering, it didn't really matter. But given that there's an argument to be made that the Red Bull is, second and potentially even the third quickest car on the grid, it is now a much bigger problem that Sergio is incapable of hoovering up the points. Helmut Marko went on record, I think it was just before the start of the British Grand Prix weekend, saying that his contract would be, quotes, looked over during the summer break, which in theory only gives Sergio Hungary, which is the round coming up as of time of this recording, and Monza before we adjourn for the summer break for him to get it together. And it's also worth noting that it was divulged that Checo has two separate performance clauses in his contract. One of which being is that he needs to be within 100 points in the World Drivers' Championship of Max. He is currently 118, and that he needs to be fifth place in the Drivers' Championship, of which he is P6. I can't remember who's ahead him in the standings right now, but it's only by a few points. But the latter one being particularly concerning because both Lewis and George are 8 points behind Checo right now. Lewis being 8 points behind, Russell being like 3 or 4. And it becomes a question of which one do you think is more likely? That Checo is going to close up the gap and vault himself up into P5 and potentially close the points deficit, the stipulated points deficit to Max, or that given Mercedes' run of form, that they will find something and both of them will go ahead and then leapfrog Sergio in the driver's standings. Take your pick. But as a direct result of this, it has been widely speculated that Red Bull is sort of looking through their options in other drivers. It seems like the two front runners for Checo being fired mid-season would be Daniel Ricciardo or Liam Lawson. It seems like for whatever reason, Tsunoda is just not going to get a promotion to the big boy team, Red Bull Racing proper, as opposed to RB, which is wild. I don't know if it's some weird holdover from his more wild years in the sport, but is what it is. But yeah, that's sort of the that's just sort of the rundown on Red Bull's sort of mess. But a little further down the grid, Haas was initially confirmed Ali Behrman is taking over Hulkenberg's vacated seat for 2025. Of course, he had his stand-in performance for Carlos when Carlos was out with appendicitis for Jeddah, I think that was. And he's confirmed. Now it's worth noting that Kevin Magnussen is still not safe and could end up being out of a drive, much like he was. And that was either 2018 or 2019 when Schumacher and Mazepin were confirmed, and that sent, I guess that would have been Grosjean and Magnussen packing then. And it's theorized that Ocon could take that seat, which is wild. But at any rate, that is sort of the silly season update. Again, it is the silliest of seasons. F1 is full of the absolute silliest of gooses this year. So we will just have to kind of keep you updated as pieces continue to move and as frankly the driver market is unstable as it's ever been. But moving on track action. Practice sessions were interesting. It's worth noting that there were omnipresent rain chances all weekend, with FP1 and FP2 registering about 60%. FP1 had some young drivers and rookies who were either making their F1 debuts or just this as a part of a continued FP1 regimen. We saw Ali Behrman, who again recently announced his move to Haas, Isaac Hajar with Red Bull, and Franco Colapinto of Williams were all in attendance. And then Alpine's Jacques Duhan was also there. Early in FP1, Tsunoda would spin off into the gravel, and that would bring out a red flag. And then rain would arrive around the time that Piastri would actually report a hydraulics issue and would sort of end his run. Lando would end up topping the session. FP2 truth be told, wasn't really all that interesting. As Norris would again go fastest, and then it would start raining. And that would continue into Saturday for FP3, which, granted, would cause a bit of chaos. Everybody started out on inters for the Saturday, though Gasly would spin at Club Corner and bring out the red flag, and then Verstappen went for a spin at Brooklands. Um, then, rather oddly, during this little lull period, Ricardo was seen weaving in the fast lane of the pits, which was very strange. No further action taken, but they weren't terribly pleased by this. But Russell would top FP3 with Lewis right behind. And that is, again, a little bit of foreshadowing. Qualifying was still very wet. There would be inters for Q1. Perez would go for a spin heading into Cops, which would bring out the red flag. He would get the car beached. And that was yet another very embarrassing Q1 exit for Sergio Perez. Stroll and Alonso would be noted for a pit lane incident, as well as Stroll running the red light at the end of the pits, which was all very odd. Um, to Sergio's credit, Verstappen would also have a moment at Cops, but he didn't beach it, so there's that. Zhou Guan Yu would put together a screamer of a lap in the horribly undercooked Sauber and would go P8 and make it into Q2. Logan Sargent also made it into Q2. Lewis would end up going fastest that session with Bottas, Ocon, Magnussen, Perez, and Gasly all eliminated from Q1. Although Gasly, to be fair, was broadly academic because he had and yes, you did hear this correctly, a 50-place grid penalty for taking a new power unit. So he was starting on the back row of the grid anyway, so who cares? Q2 would end up being the first dry qualifying session, and race control would enable DRS as a result. Most would head off on softs, with Williams, both Logan and Albon initially going actually quite quickly. But in the end, it would actually end up being Lando, George, and Lewis that would be fastest that session. Max very nearly didn't make it to Q3. Really, really struggling with pace. But he was able to put together I think it was a P9 or P10 lap to close out Q2 and would end up sneaking his way through. But this saw Leclerc eliminated from Q2 along with Sargent, Zhou Guanyu, Yuki, and Daniel. Q3 was rather uneventful, all things considering. Red Bull sort of went through Verstappen's car with a fine-tooth comb because they suspected that there might be some floor damage from Verstappen's Q1 excursion into the gravel trap. But really, it was a three-horse race for pole. It was George, Lewis, and Lando. Lando initially was on provisional pole. Lewis snatched it, only for George to snatch it right at the very, very, very end and go quickest. And then it was only by about a tenth and a bit. Verstappen was P4 ahead of Piastri in P5. But now this is where it gets fun. So now we're getting into the Sunday. We're getting into race day. And this was truly a Silverstone kind of for the books. So it was mixed conditions throughout the whole race. But Gasly, first of all, wouldn't take the start because the gearbox failed on the formation lap. So well done, Alpine. You continue to be a meme. And Perez would start from the pits because he took a fresh engine. But, well, there are a couple of things, I guess, going on here before we sort of open up the floor to chat about the race. Well, I guess, first of all, thoughts from everybody, since we've got vastly more people here, so a vastly, in theory, broader range of opinions. I guess hot or not, banger or clanger, as Tomo says. I have a feeling I know what the collective crowd is going to say, but let's open it up. So, Jarrett?
Yeah, this was an entertaining race. Like outside of the outcome, I was seated, honestly. I feel like inclement weather sort of levels the playing field in F1. Because you really get to see who has the testicular fortitude to pull moves when it comes to switching over from inners to slicks. So tire strategy was a big thing. Um, and it definitely, that last stint, you could definitely see how it played out. So how's this work? I'm just giving my take on the race and doing the whole thing, and then I'm passing Mike, or how we do this?
Give me all your thoughts, my friend.
All the thoughts. So of course, it's no secret we have a group chat. We text each other when there's motorsports on the television. And I was like, I don't know what Lewis has left, but I'm praying he has fresh softs. And I was like, oh no, that's dumb. He needs mediums. He needs mediums. I'm like, y'all don't know wheel. You don't know what's about to happen. Just let Lewis. This is his track. Just let him do what he got to do. So when Max took hards, I was like, oh, okay. Max is going to try to unleash all the speed of the Red Bull and see if he can catch him. And everybody's like, oh no, he's getting closer. He's getting closer. And then when Max passed Lando like a sheet waving in the wind, I was like, oh hell. But I was still confident. Lewis told Bono, like, I got this. Shut up. Get off the radio. And just maintain the distance. I feel like if the greatest tire muncher to me in the history of F1 is Lewis Hamilton. So it was a great race. I mean, obviously the emotion of Lewis winning, but the way that he won, you've seen how OP that Red Bull has been all season. And I feel like it's at that point in the year where they're starting to get clipped. I thought McLaren would have a little bit more speed than they did this weekend, but you can see the other teams creeping up on their performance. So I don't know what changes have been made at the Mercedes shop. I think if they finally got the extremities to work with the floor that has been a pain in my rear for the last 2 years, but they're finally starting to get everything cooking. Good on the shop for getting 2 wins back to back with both drivers. I know that's a huge morale boost to everybody that they're back, but I'm fully anticipating Red Bull to come out the summer break with that fire. But hopefully Mercedes, they continue there to keep their heads down at the shop and just do more. I want constructors to be interesting. I want the drivers' championship to be interesting. And as of right now, if everybody else keeps winning besides Max and Sergio keeps finishing, God knows where, it might be really interesting in the later part of the season. So it was a banger for me. Like with just the general how the race weekend lined up, but of course the outcome was sort of just the cherry on top. It was fantastic. It was a great race.
Art?
Yeah, so I would start by saying that I'm sure I know the least and have watched the least F1 out of the 4 of us on this call, and probably most of the listeners to this episode. So for context, like I didn't get into F1 until COVID, and I needed to find something else to watch. And so it's been pretty lean watching for me during my time discovering the sport. I just hate watching one car just be so dominant. And in that same group chat, I often will turn on F1 and say, oh, okay, Max is pulling away from the field. I'm not going to watch this. I'm going to go have a productive day, like enjoy my life. So coming into the weekend and reading, like you mentioned, about Max's struggles in qualifying in Q2, that gave me some hope and some optimism. I know historically that this is obviously a very important track for Lewis. Like I knew that much, and I know about the 8 wins. So, I feel like in F1, you've got your home track. You always have a little bit of extra juice. You want to win in front of that crowd. So, the first third of the race, Mercedes is running 1-2. And I'm thinking, oh, this is great. This is perfect. This is exactly what you want. And then Lewis takes the lead. But then Lando just comes like a bat out of hell, it seems like, and takes the lead from both of them. And so at that point, I was nervous because obviously that's a good team, a really good driver. And then when they went 1-2 at McLaren, I was like, uh-oh, this might be really big trouble. So I'm now like losing some faith as the race is going on because I'm just thinking, oh, it's just not going to happen. Like it's too good to be true. Like the story isn't going to happen. And so then late in the race, they have that final stop and, they play the audio talking about the tire for the stop. And, Lewis said, give me what I want. And they gave it to him. I was like, okay, that's a great sign. Like, I like when there's not pushback, when the team trusts the driver. They're the ones that know the car better than anyone in that moment. Then I'm holding my breath, wondering like what's going to happen in these last 10 laps. Like my heart rate had to be spiking for sitting on the couch for however that 10-15 minutes was. And then of course, Max comes back like the zombie or like the monster in the movie, right? Like just die already, just stay away. And so he comes charging back with like 3 to go or 4 to go. And I'm like, I'm just so sick of this, man. Just let me have this one, please. And so obviously, yeah, we had the ending that at least I wanted. This was score one more for the good guys. And so, for me, this was the first time I've ever gotten to see Lewis win live. I've watched highlights in old races on YouTube since I've gotten into F1, but like it's much different seeing a driver you're rooting for win live as it's happening. And, obviously knowing, like I said, how important the British Grand Prix is for him, setting that track record. It's just so important. And then, they finish the race and, he's sitting there, he's being held by his dad and he's wiping tears from his eyes. It feels like a movie ending, right? It's like the perfect ending. Like he could have just gone off into the sunset and like roll credits at that point. So, even with the winner, it still was a great race for me, just because of the unpredictability. Like Jarrett mentioned, when the weather comes along, that can definitely shake up the field. So that part was exciting for me. Like I said, it wasn't a parade of, the Red Bull one just driving away from the field, which made it really exciting for me. So yeah, I loved it. I was very happy that I was able to watch virtually the entire race. That hasn't been the case for a lot of them this season. So it was great. 10 out of 10 would recommend. I would watch the sequel. I would love it.
All right, JT.
To be honest, I guess like this is probably one of the few times that I would say that F1 cleared IndyCar in race product that weekend. Whether that had to do with the fact that that was the same weekend IndyCar had introduced the hybrids, and we really didn't quite know what the fuck was going to go on there. And I mean, some of it was kind of disastrous, but that's besides the point. Also, Silverstone usually is not a track that produces that great racing, or like the racing's not usually that exciting. So, for Silverstone standards, I would say it was a decent race. Probably part of that had to do with the fact that it had rained before the race had started, and that the mixed conditions had made it a lot more exciting. Because before, I mean, perfectly dry Silverstone races, usually not much happens. That's just how the track is. But I guess I would say it was pretty decent, from what I watched. I mean, I'm glad Lewis finally got a win. I mean, everybody seemed happy about that.
Yeah, so this, and not even just for the outcome and just for the winner. This is certainly, I think, so far this year for me, is probably the best race of the season. You know, Austria got good, and then both Lando and Max got greedy and wiped each other out, which is, well, not particularly helpful. Um, and then some of the other races rather, it's been lots of coulda, shoulda, wouldas from somebody, trying to chase down Max. But yeah, it was a straight fight between, for a lot of it, between McLaren and Mercedes, um, with Red Bull, well, Max really just kind of hanging off, kind of in the periphery. And that's kind of the other thing, say what you will about Max, Red Bull as a team, broadly speaking, but their race execution is damn near flawless. Um, and truth be told, I mean, that was born of many years of trying to chase down, particularly Ferrari and Mercedes, but with subpar engines. That's how we got here. So then, basically you create all things equal within sort of the Red Bull structure. And that's how you get this nigh on indomitable force. Because let's be clear, Max did not have the pace really all weekend. But through just, again, excellent strategy execution, and then, well, frankly, Max just driving and a little bit of luck, through some misfortune for others at the front, he was able to haul himself into a P2. Because really at one point it was looking like, particularly in that transition of conditions during the second stint, going from dries to inters, and Carlos Sainz was tracking him down. It briefly looked like the Red Bull was at that point, sort of a P5 car, P6, really. Um, but they were able to haul that thing to a position where it frankly just didn't deserve. Um, and I don't think that that can be stressed enough. Um, just how good Red Bull can be. It's easy to go, oh, it's just the car. Oh, it's just the car. But now that Red Bull's back is kind of to the wall and they're needing to execute, they are. And that has been one of my burning criticisms of Mercedes for a while, if I'm being perfectly honest. They had an absolute rocket ship. So, what is strategy when you just have horsepower? Um, but they were immediately found out when you had pace parity in 2021 with the Red Bull, and then in well, really 22 and to a lesser extent 23. 23, you can argue, is kind of the nadir of Mercedes and pace, or I guess more accurately, lack thereof. But yeah, no, Red Bull is Red Bull. But, yeah, no, Lewis he just did his thing, like I said, some of the post-race interviews, Bono was like, "Okay, well, when Lewis tells me to shut up, I know it's time to go." And, he did his things, he managed the sauce beautifully. It's worth noting that the softs were not the optimal compound of tire to be on, neither were the hards that Max was on, those better. If the race had been a few laps longer, he would have had Lewis. It was really the mediums. But he Lewis was able to just kind of pull everything together. It all came together, and that's how you get a record ninth victory at any circuit. And he did it at Silverstone, and it was wild. So yes, we've got group chats, and of course amongst us, we've got the group text, and Jarrett's like, oh, if Lewis wins this, we crash in the show. And I'm like, not a snowball's chance in hell. And I said that just because I didn't think that Lewis was going to be able to do it. Um, I'm like, this feels good now. We've seen the story too often. The one you love, the one you're rooting for is leading, and then it all falls away right at the end. And it just didn't. And I was actually watching the Grand Prix. I was at a friend's house, sat down watching. I have been slowly introducing them to F1, and and I'm pacing around the living room nervously as it's 3 to go, and Lewis is still leading. I had to have worn holes in his carpet in that spot, and then yeah, Lewis wins, and my brain just goes, "Wait a minute, Lewis has just won," and then just the waterworks start, and I am on the couch crying because Lewis finally did it and did it at Silverstone, and it's like it really does feel like a storybook ending. It feels like that's where you get some '80s power ballad that plays in the background, while we fade to black. Um, and that's what we had. And there was also some fun stuff. I don't know how much of the post-race stuff any of you all paid attention to, but Lewis was getting off the scale after the race weigh-in. Mohammed bin Sulayem comes to shake Lewis's hand, and then Lewis starts to do it purely on reflex, and then because he still had his helmet on, he looks up and sees it's Mohammed and just walks away. He drops the handshake and just strolls off. So clearly, to some extent, this was a bit of vindication for Abu Dhabi 21, I think, for Lewis, that he still got it, and he talked about it in his post race that he didn't know if I guess it would have been Jeddah 2021 He was like, was that it? He didn't know if he was ever going to win another Grand Prix after this, after that, rather. And, this is kind of the confirmation that, he can still do it. He can still race at a top level and win races. And I really think that that can't be overstated enough. I put on the pod account, tweeted from the pod account. I think it was it after George? No, it was after Montreal. That same thing, give Lewis a car that isn't utter garbage and he can do good work. Lewis is not washed or blah 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 blah. Um, and this is really just proof positive of that. Certainly McLaren gave him a good run and Red Bull pulled it together at the end, but generally today, best sort of combination of, race IQ and general pace and strategy, it was really Mercedes on the day. Um, but certainly for some other sort of updates with those throughout the field, again, Verstappen P2, Lando would take a P3. We're going to have a talk about that here in a sec. Um, Ferrari is continuing to not have a good time with their latest upgrade package. Leclerc was 14th after just a combination of lack of pace and then just baffling strategy calls, although Carlos finished P5. Um, and Aston Martin seems to have rediscovered some amount of form after just a atrocious stretch of races, with Stroll and Alonso coming home P7, P8, with Alex Albon taking P9 and Yuki rounding out P10. And special mention to Nico Hulkenberg, who was just on one and finished P6 in the Haas. I mean, granted, this isn't last year's or really even the year before's Haas. They've got some real go about them, but P6 is madness when you consider where this team was 12 months ago. But moving on, we're going to do Let's Start a Dialogue. And this is a question that I'm going to pose to all of you. But do we think that McLaren is squandering winnable races? There was a lot of talk from both pundits, from within McLaren, and then from just the sort of broader crowd on social media about just what was perceived to be appalling race strategy coming out of Silverstone. Leaving Piastri out on the changing conditions, leaving him out for an extra lap, then Lando coming in for the final stint a lap later, and then a roundtable discussion over the radio about tire choice when it was pretty obvious what the optimal tire was. So lots of chatter. What do you think? So, Jarrett?
Man, I thought Benito was back on the box watching McLaren's pit strategy. That was awful. Because like I said earlier in the show, they have had speed. They have had race winning speed. It's been very entertaining to see Piastri and Lando themselves try to take on Max just to make the season interesting. And it was really strange. It reminded me of what's the Russian track they don't go to anymore? Was it
Oh,
Sochi?
Sochi?
Yeah. It reminded me of that race when it rained and Lando went to the pit. Like, no. And then he wrecked. Another race that Lewis won because he's a goat. But it was just really interesting how it's like the tire strategy in addition to the slow stop. I think both cars had slow stops. And if you lose time on pit road, you're really cooked in F1 because that's, for all intents and purposes, the fastest part of the sport. They can change the tires in 2 seconds and be out. So it was, I'm sure that they're probably going to go back and relook at the game tape and look over the strategy and just see what could have been. But if they wouldn't have messed up the tire strategy or they gotten Lando in sooner, then he would have been in a better situation to possibly fight off Max. The podium would have looked different, which would have helped the point standings. But Yeah, they got to do some self reflection this week. It was not good for McLaren, not their best work.
Art?
Yeah, so I've primarily been following Lando this season, and I agree. I feel like there's just some meat on the bones still when it comes to their performances. And yeah, I think Jared's point is absolutely correct. Like if they make the correct strategy call there uh, on Sunday, they absolutely, I think, hold on to P2 and maybe have a chance to at least challenge for the win. You know, there's no guarantee. I don't think we'll ever know how hard Lewis is pushing, but uh, they definitely would have put themselves in a better position. But I mean, I look at a lot of these finishes, and it's not like he's having a bad season by any stretch. You know, I think the previous race when he finished 20th, like that's obviously a god awful result. But you just wonder, like, is it a case where like we're doing everything that we think we need to do, but we're ignoring like these tiny details, or is it a case where they're maybe they're surprised by their results and that they're having as good runs as they have, and then they overthink the strategy? Sometimes I just wonder like what's the block there that's causing like these kinds of problems? Because, and again, like I hate to go back to the Lewis example again, but like, hey, what do you want to do for tires? I want this. Absolutely. We got it. Because like we're locked in. It's late in the race. This is our chance to get a win. Um, when you've got a committee vote, uh, that's hard to do get anything done. Like in my job, right? I have to get consensus for things, and it's like herding cats. It's impossible. So, and it's a lot lower stakes and a lot slower moving than a race car at a race team, right? So I just wonder what the block is, and if it's a case where they need to structurally internally as a team figure out like, do we need to have a single voice in the room making these final calls? Because yeah, like I said, they've had great finishes, and like they're not struggling per se, but you just feel like they're not getting 100% out of the weekend that they could get. And if you really want to, continue to grow as a team and for Lando as a driver, like you have to maximize every chance you can get, right? This isn't like NASCAR where there's a ton of races or they have a playoff system where like you just get a win and you're in the playoffs, right? Like you have to maximize every single chance. And so like, a fourth place finish that could have been a second, maybe like that might come back to haunt you at the end of the year. So I don't know what the like I said the structure is, but I do think there's something that needs to be evaluated in terms of the process and figuring out how they can improve to get that last 5% performance, or just to make it so that in the clutch and crunch times, like those decisions are much smoother. So I don't know, but I agree with Jarrett. Like, there's definitely room to improve. And, if you're having these kind of results and still making these kind of blunders, like, that's a good problem to have, right? It's better to have a bad call or to make mistakes or slide in the box and finish third than have all of that and finish 10th, which could easily happen, or wreck out or have something. So, in a way, you're getting away with it, which might be the problem, right? Like if you're making these kinds of mistakes and like you're still getting good finishes out of it, like that is the bit of the deodorant, right, that covers it, when really they need to take a full-on shower, right? Like they just need to have a more intense look at it. So it's an interesting problem to have, but it's definitely solvable. And like I said, I think they have more room to grow. Like that team hasn't hit its ceiling yet. And so if they can get that nailed down, they'll be an even stronger contender the second half of the season and going into next year.
Yeah, I'll have you know though, if you get cat treats, collecting a group of them is really not that hard.
That's cheating though. That's
JT?
I mean, I really don't know. I guess in short, they just have to lock in. I don't know. I mean, like, McLaren is not usually the team that I am getting on for fumbling strategies and messing them up. Usually that's Ferrari because that's usually who does it. They're the usual suspects, whether that be in F1 or WEC. They are across the board usually fumbling strategies horribly. McLaren, I guess, I don't know, maybe it's because they're not really used to, like, getting the results they're getting right now, and, I mean, like Art already said, like, they're getting decent results, like, it's not like they're fumbling strategies and they're finishing, like, mid-pack. Like, they mess something up and they finish, like, at worst, like, 4th or 5th or something, and even 3rd place, like, you're still getting podiums and you're still getting points. So So like it's not like detrimental mistakes, but I mean, I don't know. Some of their strategies can be kind of questionable because I mean, I'm not saying like Lando frauded his win at Miami, but really the main reason why he won that was because Verstappen made a mistake. He hit the bollard and it messed up something on the front of his car. Had that not happened, I don't really think Lando would have won. He probably would have finished on the podium, but probably not would have won. So I don't know. I mean, they definitely have a lot of improvement, and I mean, they may not necessarily address that up until it starts severely costing them. Like they are screwing up a strategy and they are now not able to bounce back from it as easily, and they're finishing like mid pack or something or worse, or DNFing. Like, I mean, they haven't really screwed up tremendously since like Sochi, like the one notable race that they will never live that down. Orlando will never live that down. So, I mean, they're okay now. Like they're okay. They're in the clear, but they will eventually have to address it.
And so I find it really interesting that all three of you have come to varying versions of the same conclusion. And I think from what I've seen is actually one that a lot of folks have come to. And that is that to some extent, McLaren's own pace seems to have surprised them a little bit. Pardon me. And as such, they're still in some ways very much operating like a midfield team, even though they are a team that is capable of winning races. Now, it's worth noting that it gets really tough to do the math when on percentile differences when on paper Mercedes, McLaren, Red Bull are this close. I mean, you're talking about differences at this point of thousandths of a percent, just for a little bit of context sake, and it varies from track to track also. Um, so there's not a clear pecking order at the front of the grid anymore. But my point is that McLaren is very much in that mix. And you can make the argument that the McLaren is probably the best all around car right now, as opposed to both the Red Bull and the Mercedes, which can be a little bit peaky, for want of a better word. But as a result, that makes it very easy for Lando and Oscar to extract huge amounts of performance from, even if maybe the ceiling isn't quite as high as either the Mercedes or the Red Bull. But as a result of this, this pace is sort of catching out everybody. You know, folks behind the pit wall, the drivers to a greater or lesser extent. And it's, yes, creating these finishes, or these situations rather, where you are getting, again, P2s, P3s, P4s, P5s, so on and so forth. But then the argument can be made is, okay, well, maybe they're leaving some pace, be it just through driver error or through pit wall error. We're leaving something on the table here. I went through and had the benefit of looking over kind of a run of races where one could argue where maybe not that McLaren had kind of left something. So in like the case of Monaco, Oscar qualified P2 at Monaco behind Charles, and pardon me. But interestingly enough, if you stitch together all of his best sector times, he was like a tenth and a half clear of Charles, or would have been rather. And again, and I mean, we talk about this with Monaco all the time. It is very much a track where really the race is won in quali. Such is the fact that these cars are entirely too big to facilitate any real overtaking at the circuit. But I mean, hey ho, it happens. Oscar is still a relatively young driver. You're going to have mistakes. These things are going to happen. And then the lengthy red flag period basically nuked any and all real strategic opportunities, because it was very much a procession on mediums for the rest of that race after the red flag. Canada, you can argue were again with some execution errors from Lando. Um, had was able to get around Max, was able to get around George, and that was another race of changeable conditions. But spent way too much time fighting with George, and then made just silly mistakes with like running wide on corner exit or outbraking himself entirely. And that was what allowed Max to effectively escape up the road. Spain, um, same thing. It was a bad start, which put Lando a decent way behind Max, and I think that was actually George then too. But was able to get clear, but by that point it was just too late to try to really close down the gap. Austria was just a mess of the highest order. You know, Lando had been driving hard to catch Max and had been racking up effectively deleted laps from the stewards, and it was going to be a plus 5 second penalty anyway as a direct result of all of the constant track limits violations, which, speaking of which, Austria and track limits violations name a more iconic duo. But yes, and JT shakes her head. But yes, so that's kind of the thing. Is that even before that he was driving sort of haggardly, and then there's the again, same thing with execution. If in Austria, if Oscar hadn't gotten bopped with it was an impeding penalty, if I remember correctly. At Austria, I think it was one of the Hasses. It was probably Hulkenberg, since Magnussen is basically useless. Um, and so that dropped him down a few spots because otherwise he could have been the one if he had started P3 on the grid like he had qualified. He could have been the one to profit from Lando and Max coming together towards the end of the race. And it's little things like this where it really starts to call into question. There are a lot of these that can be argued. McLaren to a greater or lesser extent was a victim of circumstance. But you start to piece this all together and it starts to become a pattern. And it's one of those things that has a lot of people, again, particularly after the Silverstone weekend, feeling like perhaps well, frankly, that McLaren just isn't ready for the big leagues yet. They aren't ready to truly be a front running car. And I think that's a shame because, again, talking about, again, kind of averaging out quality and race pace of the top three cars, really going into uh, any given weekend, it's anybody's game, truly. Um, the Mercedes seems to thrive on these higher speed tracks, and especially these races with kind of funky conditions has really suited them well. But the McLaren is not slow, and well, frankly, Red Bull is starting to struggle a little bit with some platform limitations that, in fairness, they've been talking about for a while and have finally come true. Um, so it's one of those little things. It's kind of, I guess, that last 5%. I know certainly when you guys on the main podcast, I know Art particularly, when you start talking about, race execution and what have you, I know you reference that a lot. It's that last little bit, and that's really what makes the difference. And I mean, in here, it's no different. Um, that's what McLaren is really missing. It's just, yes, it's these little things, and they're really, as a front running team, you should not be having these weekends where, yes, it feels like you've got Mattia Binotto back on the pit wall. That's just not good. But I suppose with that, for any further thoughts and feelings and comments, questions, concerns, I guess I'll open the floor for everybody to have their few minutes. Should anybody have anything?
Yeah, I'll go first. I would just say that this win for me, I guess it kind of reinvigorated my excitement for the F1 season. I think maybe sometimes you just need to see your driver win, right? Like it's very simple. It's easy to say, but and I'm sure for a lot of fans who have been following Lewis's whole career, right? Like it's just a different perspective because like they've seen the highs and the dominance and 103 wins in a pretty short amount of time by comparison. So for them, this is kind of like a sigh of relief, right? Coming out of this 2-year lull, and I think reflecting on how important this win was, and some of the interviews talking about how he was worried that he'd lost it, right? And was it worth all the work that he was doing training, trying to keep himself maintained physically, mentally, being sharp, staying sharp, and not getting the results? And I think a lot of that might be due to the vehicle that he was using and the feedback that wasn't getting used, but that might be a longer conversation for another day. But so anyway, to circle back, just for him to get this win and kind of get this monkey off his back. And, for me, being able, like I said, seeing your guy win in person, or not in person, but live, it's just is so invigorating. It makes you remember why you love the sport. And I'm sure, what this is win 104. I would bet this ranks really high up there, maybe a top 10 win for Lewis personally, I would guess, just because of the the amount of work it took to get back, right? And like the mental work it probably took to get back. And you hear from athletes that have been at the top, and then you can have a fall off or whatever you want to call it, but they just aren't maintaining the same success that they had before. One of the consistent themes has been how hard it was mentally, because they're thinking, what's going on, what's going wrong, like, and there's like this fear that you're never going to get back. And like with racing, it's so random, and it can be such a game of chance sometimes. And like, you know, team sports, more often than not, the better team wins, right? Like the better football team, the better basketball team, more often than not wins. But racing, it can be so random, and there's a million little factors that can go into you not winning. So that I think when you have this opportunity and you to break this streak and be able to enjoy this win, I just think it means a bit more, because you appreciate it more, right? It's easy to enjoy like your 8th win of the year, right? Because you've already won 7, and this just seems like an inevitability for you. But when you go on that long streak, I think you just appreciate it more. And so I just am glad that he got the success that he did. And like I said, for me, it makes me excited for the next race. I'm not expecting another Hollywood ending necessarily, but just the fact that the team and the driver were able to put together a complete race. Obviously they've been showing better pace as of lately, so that gives me some optimism for the second half of the season. And hopefully they can get a couple more. I think that'd be great. George was great, and I didn't mention George earlier, but he was fast for a lot of the race as well. So they're figuring it out. Maybe they're listening to the 7-time champion in the garage that they have. But like I said, it just makes me excited for the rest of the season. And I'm sure that was a shot in the arm for the team too, because they're all working hard, just trying to find a way to get that success. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see more. Now, if I turn on my TV and Max is ahead by 20 seconds, I'm gonna trash talk y'all in the group chat, and I'm gonna turn it off. So I'm just letting you know, like, you get a pass for a while, but it's not you don't get 5 months of a pass. So I need the field to step its game up and stay on this man's neck. Make him have to earn it.
I mean, I'd say that this is proof that cyberbullying works. That we wouldn't be able to sing Lewis's praises if they didn't call out that email. Like, hey, wait a minute, what y'all doing over there at Brackley? What's going on? Why George so fast and Lewis so not? But to Art's point, all great athletes need the reminder that they can still do this, they can still win. And I hope that this wakes up the shop. And I want some. Well, it's Tuesday. I can say this right. I want some Mercedes terrorism for the rest of the year. So, hopefully they have some upgrades coming, that can make them more balanced on both high and low downforce tracks. I'd like to not see such a performance drop off when the venue changes. If they can get that, and they can keep the wing and the floor being best friends, it might be a different story here the second half of the season. So everybody enjoy your mai tais and your yachts and your clubbing and all that stuff now. But hopefully there's some speed coming shortly. Because I mean, all of the F1 TV subscribers, all the people who wake up early, Americans, we have it semi easy until we get to Vegas, but we don't have that many like wake up in the middle of the night races to watch. So I don't want to lose sleep over trash. So I need a Mercedes to continue the upward streak. I'm talking about you, Vegas GP.
Yeah, that stretch of races, the Asian leg of races with China, Japan, and Australia were so hard. I was up at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and then with China being a sprint race, I was like, oh my god, kill me, please. But I'm sorry. At any rate, JT, did you have anything?
No, I just think it's funny that Alpine had car issues again. I mean, Alpine seems to be synonymous with car issues, whether it be F1 or in WEC and the Mechachrome engines blowing up at the halfway, well, before they even reached the halfway mark of the race. Both cars blew up, but we all saw that coming anyways.
Yeah, you're true. Like I said, I think I was having a conversation with you separately, but it's hilarious that the Mechachrome name has lived on in WEC, given that they were synonymous with the basically customer Renault engines, but didn't really have any support. So Mechachrome was shorthand for, yo, these engines trash. Um, and so the fact that they are using this as the factory engine in WEC is just, it boggles my mind. I think it's so funny. Um, but um, but yeah, no, this run of races has been kind of fun. It's been much closer. The field has really condensed. This is the closest it's ever been. Um, like I said, I was, just to give you guys like a kind of a peek behind the curtain, as I had been sort of averaging out quali and like race paces, and it is to the point where we're not, in some cases, depending on the circuit, we're not even talking about tenths of a percent anymore difference. We're talking hundredths. And I can't stress that enough, particularly either in the beginning of the turbo hybrid era when Mercedes death start the field for, almost a decade straight, or even now in the ground effect era with Red Bull. We have not been at hundredths of a percent in pace between three different cars. It's absolute madness. And it's encouraging for what we're going to see for the rest of the season. And given that the regulations are supposed to be pretty well, they're going to be pretty stable next year before we prepare for the new cars for 26. In theory, unless somebody just completely blows it somehow, this is going to continue. Um, and then, you have to remember kind of the broader context of all of this moving in to next year. You know, Red Bull's silver bullet, their, God mode is gone. Newey has buggered off into the sunset. Um, so what's gonna happen for 2025? Again, the regulation set's pretty stable, so in theory, there's not as much work that needs to be done. But yeah, no, it's interesting to watch this all kind of coalesce and end up with potentially the constructors race is only getting tighter with each passing round. Especially as Max is struggling and as Sergio is, well, frankly, useless. But then you have even a bad, or I shouldn't say bad. You have a McLaren team that is not executing perhaps as well as they are, but they're still getting regularly double points and good points. Um, and Lewis and George at Mercedes are still gobbling up points consistently. It's only going to condense further as we run through the year. So yeah, this has me excited for certainly what we're going to see for the rest of the year. And I'm hoping it only continues to be as good, certainly as we've had it so far. If you had asked me if this is the scenario we were going to be looking at after the first couple races of the year, I would have told you were crazy. Um, but it's funny. It really seems like, and it's, so funny to do this all with the benefit of hindsight, blah, 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 blah. But, it's funny given that the F1 movie was recently announced, kind of where you can look at a certain point in the plot and be like, yep, that's when that thing starts to happen. With some hindsight, you can look at Max's brake failure in Australia and go, "Yup, that was sort of the first real sort of crack in the complete indomitability that Red Bull had had for by that point, 2 and change years." Um, so no, it's just it's funny to see those inflection points. Um, but I suppose on that bombshell, no, we're not Top Gear. But with that, we have been your hosts, Danny and JT, and thank you so much, Jared and Arthur, for coming on today and for chatting F1 stuff with us. This was super fun, and certainly the think we're gonna have to move and shuffle things around a little bit more so we can have these crossover episodes a bit more frequently.
I mean, if you like this one, you remember the Olympic break episode is coming, and that's gonna be a whopper of a crossover. So, spoilers
Whopper.
if anyone's
Now I'm
listening,
hungry.
it's gonna be a good one. I'm excited for that.
But with that, everybody, thank you so much for listening. This has been an episode of Chicanery, and until next time, everybody.